In fact, there's an enormous discrepancy between this conventional wisdom and what people who study intelligence have found. About 10 years ago, in the wake of the bell curve, the American Psychological Association put together a panel to prepare a document on the scientific state of the art concerning intelligence, representing people from all over the spectrum in terms of their beliefs about intelligence. And the consensus report noted that intelligence is a stable property of a person. It's well measured by IQ tests, and it predicts many life outcomes. Moreover, IQ is largely heritable within populations, accounting for anywhere between 50 and 80% of the variance, depending on how you measure it and at what age. This is established by many studies of tens of thousands of identical and fraternal twins, where identical twins are more correlated in their intelligence than fraternal twins, of twins separated at birth and who grow up in different environments whose IQs are highly correlated, and in comparisons of biological and adoptive siblings, where the correlations are far stronger among biological siblings than among adoptive siblings, and indeed better predicted by the siblings' biological parents than by their adoptive parents. Now, importantly, this does not imply that the differences between groups are genetic. The textbook example of this logical point is that if you plant a number of varieties of corn in a field, then we know that the heights of the corn plants will vary because of the differences in the genes of the different corn varieties. But if you plant half of them in Iowa and the other half in Nevada, then most of the variation will, of course, be environmental. And it is quite possible that when you compare different human groups, as opposed to looking at the difference between one person and another within a group, the differences between groups could be environmental, even if the differences within a group are genetic. Well, what about the difference then between Jews and other Europeans? This is a testable hypothesis. One could simply do adoption studies and look at the correlations between adoptive and biological parents of Jewish and non-Jewish parents and children. As far as I know, none has been done, but it could be done. So the current evidence then that the Jewish, non-Jewish difference is genetic is circumstantial. It comes from the fact that the advantage is so large as to require a rather massive environmental cause, that there are few known environmental causes of boosts in adult IQ of that magnitude, that the advantage is long-standing. It's been around for as long as there have been IQ scores of Jewish populations, and it is not an artifact of socioeconomic status or wealth. That is, it's also found in lower SES Jewish groups. So the evidence is reasonable but circumstantial, and then it behooves us to look at the environmental explanations, the alternatives. And one of them comes from another word to add to your Jewish vocabulary from the same list, and that is the word disqualified. To drop out of law school, med school, or business, as seen through the eyes of parents, grandparents, and Uncle Sid. In extreme cases, simply choosing to major in art history when Irv's son David is majoring in biology is sufficient grounds for disqualification. So the issue comes down to, is it Jewish genes or Jewish mothers, as Jennifer Senior in New York Magazine put it. Now, the fact that there is an environmental alternative doesn't mean that we should give it a free pass. Environmental explanations need to face the same scrutiny as genetic ones, and it's not clear that the environmental explanation has all that much direct evidence in its support. A major finding in behavioral genetics, one that gets a lot less publicity than the fact that heritability of intelligence is greater than zero, is that the non-genetic contribution to variance in intelligence, the fact that identical twins raised together are not perfectly correlated, does not seem to be a result of familial, that is, the shared environment either. So you might say, well, if intelligence is, say, in a given population 50% heritable, that means the other 50% must come from variations in families, right? Well, not so fast. Because a very large number of studies with an enormous number of participants has shown that, first of all, siblings separated at birth are as correlated as siblings reared together in adult intelligence, and that adopted siblings are not correlated at all. So all of those years of growing up in a given home with the same mother and siblings and books and TV sets and so on seems to leave no lasting mark on an adult's intelligence. So there's something other than families that accounts for the non-genetic variation in intelligence, possibly culture, such as a peer group or environmental influences outside the home, sheer chance, whether some neurons in your brain zigged or zagged on a particular day of development, whether you inhaled a virus or were dropped on your head as a baby, and perhaps nonlinear gene-environment interactions, environments that make one person go up and another person go down, very speculative. Another question one has to ask, is it really true that Jewish cultural norms favor achievement in physics, math, economics, chess, social science, philosophy, and other spheres in which, in the 20th century, Jews have excelled, but which aren't necessarily a part of the value set of traditional Jewish culture? I'll give a couple of anecdotes, which is all we really have. My friend Ned Block, when he told his father that he was going into philosophy, his father said, "Philosophy? Luft, air." And in a profile of my former colleague Noam Chomsky in the New Yorker, there's a quote from his mother who said that when he decided to go into linguistics, she said, "I don't know, I walk up and down the streets all day. I never see a sign that says, 'Help wanted, linguist.'" And perhaps the most extreme statement of this skepticism comes from the brilliant social psychologist Stanley Schachter in his autobiography, who wrote, "For a 17-year-old boy from the Bronx, Yale in 1939 was hideous, a preppy, jock, socialite paradise not meant for the likes of me. I suppose it was what I deserved, for I went to Yale much against my father's wishes. He couldn't have cared less about higher education and wanted me to go to a one-year laundry college, no kidding, out in the Midwest and join him then in the family business. I've never understood what this intellectually driven Jewish immigrant business is all about. It wasn't true of my family, and I know very few families for which it was true. To me, Jewish love of learning has always seemed a myth perpetrated by a few rabbis' sons who weren't good at anything much but going to school and then spending the rest of their lives writing novels about it." Finally, an environmental explanation in terms of cultural explanations can only go so far. You've heard the expression, "If wishes were horses, beggars would ride." You might want your son to be an Einstein, but that isn't enough to make him one. So I would say that the environmental explanation is also unproven. It has less evidence in favor of it than the genetic one, but it has to be conceded that both of them are possible. So a second hypothesis of the CHH paper is that there were high rates of Ashkenazi endogamy, that is, marrying within the group. This is a prerequisite for rapid selection of a trait, again, a standard finding from evolutionary biology, that low gene inflow is a necessary condition for rapid selection, no matter what is being selected for. If new genes are coming into the population through interbreeding, or in the human case intermarriage, that will dilute whatever is being selected for, and selection will never have much of a chance to make an impact. So are Ashkenazim unusually endogamous? CHH claim that they are, and they cite as evidence the existence, I think known to many people in this room, of cultural traditions discouraging exogamy. As my grandmother told my mother, it's just as easy to fall in love with a Jewish man as it is a non-Jewish man. And in fact, what historical records we have suggest that there was little intermarriage over much of Ashkenazi history, and compared to many other groups, of course, far less conversion. Contemporary accounts, historical accounts that is, though sporadic, seem to bear this out and describe Jewish life as one with little outbreeding. Today we can answer the question more precisely by looking directly at genes, and I think the current estimate is that anywhere from that there was anything from 0.5% to 1% of admixture of non-Jewish genes per generation over much of Ashkenazi history. That would be from conversions, from intermarriage, from affairs, from manumission of slaves, from rape, and so on. Now, by the way, just to be clear, many Jewish people I know seem to believe that there really is a Jewish race, that I've heard it said that European Jews and Jews from the former Arab countries and Yemenite Jews and so on are very closely genetically related, more so than they are to their neighbors. That is probably not true, and I think even though there are signatures of genes that one can find across Jewish populations, 0.5% admixture per generation multiplied over the many generations, over 1,000 years, will mean that a large number of genes from neighboring groups will get sucked into the Jewish gene pool, anywhere from 35% to 55%, depending on what's measured. Third hypothesis is that Ashkenazim were concentrated in mercantile, managerial, and financial occupations, most prototypically moneylenders. That is, that they did not do for a living what the vast majority of people in Europe, indeed in the world, did at the time, namely they weren't primarily farmers, soldiers, craftsmen, or of course nobility. So the argument is that CHH reproduced from a number of Jewish historians is that there may have been an initial chance advantage in these occupations, thanks to, first of all, literacy. Once you have your children learn to read and write, unlike the vast majority of your neighbors for religious reasons, that as a byproduct predisposes them to success in more urban occupations. Because the Jews lived in a diaspora after the destruction of the Second Temple throughout the Mediterranean, there were dispersed communities that could serve as conduits for trade. And Jews were also convenient as a go-between between the Christian and Islamic civilizations in the medieval times that often didn't like to deal with each other directly. So at the beginning of Ashkenazi history, the Jews were funneled into finance, management, and selling by these initial chance advantages combined with a Christian prohibition of usury, the prohibition in many times and places of owning land, and the exclusion of medieval craftsmen guilds. So among the historical estimates that CHH cite is a number of studies, including, or at least a number of claims, I should say, from Ben Sasson in his History of the Jewish People and Arkin in Aspects of Jewish Economic History, that by 1100 AD it may even have been the majority of Ashkenazim that made their living as moneylenders. Though the pattern lessened after 1600, of course, Jews famously have been in a number of middleman niches until recently. Fourth hypothesis is that in occupations that historically were filled by Ashkenazim, success was correlated with intelligence. That is, smarter people did better. The evidence that CHH cite is contemporary. There's an enormous amount of data from various occupations, much of it summarized by Linda Gottfredson, that show that IQ is predictive of occupational success and income, holding other things constant for just about every profession, but more so for more professional professions. And indeed that financial and managerial occupations have a higher minimum IQ requirement than farming, crafts, or the military. That to be a merchant or in finance or money lending, it requires, of course, numeracy, especially in the days before spreadsheets, literacy to keep records and correspondence, an ability to predict the future, and social intelligence when it comes to giving or not giving credit to people without current day credit